What does it mean to belong, and what does it cost? Horror movies often reflect the fears of the societies that make them, but those fears don't always come from monsters. More often, they come from the systems we trust the most: religion, community, and belief. In The Witch, set in 1630s Puritan New England, fear is shaped by religious paranoia, with female independence seen as a threat to the moral order. While The Witch reflects a strict early modern Puritan society defined by religious authority and patriarchal control, Midsummer presents a contemporary communal culture rooted in collective identity, emotional expression, and ritualized belonging. These systems are often invisible, shaping behavior without being questioned. Horror brings these systems to the surface, allowing us to see how power operates beneath everyday beliefs and structures. Although The Witch and Midsummer emerge from similar Western cultural frameworks, they reveal how white patriarchal systems adapt across contexts, shifting from overt religious repression to more subtle forms of communal control, demonstrating that horror continues to expose how female identity is regulated through both fear and belonging. The Witch reflects a society structured around fear, specifically fear of sin, disobedience, and divine punishment. The film is set in a strict Puritan world and follows a family that has to survive in the wilderness, where their survival is linked to religious paranoia. Set within a Puritan context, The Witch reflects a historical moment where religious belief was tied to social order. Women in particular were expected to remain obedient and contained within rigid roles. Any deviation from these expectations could be interpreted as moral or spiritual failure. The fear of witchcraft was not just about the supernatural, it was about maintaining control over those who threatened the structure of the community. In this type of culture, control is both direct and unyielding. At the heart of this oppression lies Thomasin. Barbara Creed's concept of the monstrous feminine helps explain this dynamic. She was under scrutiny and questioning from the moment she began. It is not the acts Thomasin performs that shape who she is, rather it is the fears of others that project onto her. For women living in a strictly controlled environment governed by religious authority, mere suggestions of female independence pose a serious threat. This dynamic reflects a broader cultural anxiety surrounding women who exist outside of traditional roles. In Puritan society, identity was not individual. It was defined by obedience and conformity. Thomasin's struggle, therefore, is not just personal, but symbolic of a system that cannot tolerate deviation. Her perceived transformation into a witch becomes less about supernatural evil and more about society projecting its fears onto her. Adam Scoville's definition of folk horror and how its uses of elements such as isolation, landscape, and belief systems can help clarify the dynamics at play. Folk horror also utilizes the wilderness as both literal and metaphorical separation of the characters from society, making them dependent on a rigid system of beliefs. As for the aesthetics of the film itself, its muted color palette, low lighting, and slow pace all contribute to a claustrophobic sense of being trapped, devoid of escape from either surveillance or judgment. Even the stillness of the film contributes to this tension. Moments linger longer than expected, forcing the audience to sit with its discomfort. This pacing mirrors the rigidity of the belief system itself, slow, suffocating, and unchanging. Robin Wood's theory that horror films serve as a representation of societal repression is relevant here. Thompson's final choice to live deliciously represents a form of liberation, but however, it's a form of liberation born out of exclusion. She gains agency, but only after being completely rejected by the system meant to contain her. In The Witch, control works through fear, punishment, and isolation, which makes power clear, unyielding, and impossible to escape. Midsummer, like The Witch, shows control in a different way. The Witch presents control as openly oppressive, while Midsummer presents it as subtly persuasive, comfortable, and insidiously inviting. Our protagonist, Danny, early on, is depicted in a state of isolation from her emotions, stemming from the loss of her family. Once entering the commune, Danny isn't rejected, but is welcomed. This form of control is particularly effective because it feels voluntary. Danny is not forced into submission, yet she is guided toward it. The commune provides what she lacks: emotional validation, shared experience, and a sense of purpose. However, these benefits are conditional, requiring her to gradually surrender her autonomy. Midsummer reflects a more modern anxiety centered on emotional isolation and the desire for connection. While the commune appears culturally distant, its emphasis on belonging and shared experience resonates with contemporary concerns about loneliness, identity, and the search for meaning in a fragmented world. Unlike control by fear, the commune uses control by belonging. Danny is slowly assimilated into the commune, though through shared emotional experiences and repeated ritual performances. Danny's grief is recognized, reflected, and legitimized, although it is being manipulated and transformed at the same time. At that point, control becomes much less apparent, however, it is equally as strong. Similarly to The Witch, Midsummer utilizes elements of folklore, even if aesthetically reimagined. Rather than utilizing dark space and veiled secrets for its horror element, the film consistently employs light and openness, bright colors. The constant daylight removes any distinction between safety and danger. Without darkness to signal fear, the audience is forced to confront horror directly. This creates a sense of unease that is rooted not in surprise, but in normalization. So horror isn't hidden, it's accepted. Again, Barbara Creed's framework in The Monstrous Feminine is utilized, though modified. Danny isn't cast out as a monster, she's elevated. By virtue of becoming the May Queen, Danny is presented as empowered, yet her empowerment is conditioned upon her absolute submission to the communal values. Similarly, Robin Wood's concept of repression is utilized differently. As opposed to repressing fear, the commune includes fear into their ceremonies. Grief, violence, and sacrifice aren't anomalies, they're integral components of the overall system. Ultimately, Danny does find a sense of belonging, but however, that sense of belonging occurs at the expense of her own individualism. Danny's identity fades away to become one with the community. A key question arises: is she actually empowered, or did she merely enter a slightly more subtle system of control? Unlike The Witch, which used punishment to demonstrate power, Midsummer demonstrates power through seduction, making the feeling of control appear voluntarily almost appealing. In both films, The Witch and Midsummer differ in context, but they both reveal that systems of control do not disappear, they adapt. This contrast highlights a significant shift in how horror represents control. Where earlier systems relied on fear to enforce obedience, more modern systems rely on emotional connection and belonging. Both approaches are effective because they shape identity from the inside rather than imposing it from the outside. In The Witch, control is very obvious. It is shown through religion, fear, and punishment. Thomasin is cast out because she feels threatened, the structure of the system. In Midsummer, control is far less visible. It operates through belonging, ritual, and emotional connection. Danny is welcomed, but only when she truly, fully conforms. Thomasin is isolated and feared, while Danny is surrounded and accepted. But what makes these films especially compelling is not just their differences, it's how they mirror each other. Both Thomasin and Danny are placed in systems that define their identities before they can define themselves. In The Witch, Thomasin is labeled and feared, while in Midsummer, Danny is embraced and celebrated. However, both outcomes ultimately serve the same purpose: maintaining control. Power operates through multiple methods. Whether fear or belonging, both ultimately serve to regulate behavior. Historically, horror externalized fear through forces like sin or the devil, while modern horror internalizes fear through identity, belonging, and emotional vulnerability. In both cases, the individual does not fully escape the system. They are redefined by it. This suggests that control is not something that can simply be broken, but something that evolves alongside the people it governs. This contrast shows how fear has shifted over time, reflecting broader societal changes as anxiety moves from external authority to internal identity and connection. In The Witch, fear is external and rooted in sin, punishment, and visible threats to social order. In Midsummer, fear becomes internal, shaped by identity, emotional vulnerability, and the desire to belong. Modern horror reflects a fear of being assimilated into a rigid system rather than one of being excluded from it. Ultimately, both films reveal that horror is not just about fear. It is about how systems shape identity and maintain control. While The Witch presents fear through religion, punishment, and external threats, Midsummer reflects a more modern anxiety centered on belonging, emotional vulnerability, and the loss of individuality. Together, these films show how societal fears have shifted over time from fearing visible forces like sin or the devil to fearing internal struggles with identity and connection. At the same time, both films demonstrate that control does not disappear, it evolves. Horror then does more than show what we fear. It reveals how those fears are shaped and what we are willing to give up in order to belong.